In this video, I'm going to cover the basics of the Unity editor. This way you're going to have a general overview of what each section is used for, and then we'll dive deeper into each one as we progress through the course. It does take a while before you get comfortable with using each one of these. So at the start, if you feel kind of overwhelmed and you don't understand what each one does, that's completely normal. Just give it time as we go through the course, and as you use each one, you're going to really start to understand it at that point. By default, your editor is probably on a white background instead of looking like mine does. This is called dark mode and it's a user preference. Let's go and take a look at how we can change that first. So let's go up to the edit menu and then we want to go down to preferences. And now on the left side, we want to go to general. And now you're going to see editor theme. So mine's currently on dark. There's also light mode. And that one's going to look like this. This is completely preference, so select whichever one you like. A lot of people do seem to like dark mode. So I'm going to set mine back to dark. And on this page, there is a bunch of other just general preferences that you can set up for Unity. I'm not going to change any of these here. I'm just going to leave mine by default. And it's pretty rare that I ever go through and actually change any of these. Now, the next thing I want to show you, by default, this should be already set up, but it's pretty common that it doesn't happen on Unity. On the left side here, let's go to External Tools. And we want to make sure our external script editor is set to Visual Studio. And actually, in this case, mine is not. So this does happen in Unity quite a bit where you have to set it manually. So in this drop-down list, just click it here and we want to set this to Microsoft Visual Studio. Okay, and now that that's set, we don't have to change any of these settings. And on these preferences windows, there is no save icon. It'll automatically save, so you can just click the X to close the window here. All right, so now we're actually in the editor. The first thing I want to point out here is up at the top. In the title bar here, we're going to see the name of the project that we created or the project that you have open. And then you're going to see the name of the scene. We're not going to go too deep into what a scene is in this video, but think of it like a movie. It's very similar where it's a group of things that belong together. So in a game, you could think of each level as a different scene. The start menu would be a scene. The credits menu would be a scene. Things like that. It's just a grouping of different objects. And then you're going to see some information about the build here as well as the version of Unity. Next up, we have the hierarchy window on the left side here. This is where all of the things in your scene, which are called game objects, are going to be stored and you can organize them in here. So when you open a new project in Unity, you're going to see a few things already in here. We're going to have a main camera and a directional light in your scene by default. So this is kind of like the sun in the world. In my case here, you see they're actually hidden. We have this little arrow next to the sample scene. So now after clicking that, I see the main camera and global light 2D. So this light here, that's basically the sun in our game. And then the main camera is what the user is going to see in our game. Now, if we move on to this section here, we have the scene view under the scene tab. Now, this is where we're actually going to build our game in our world. This is not what the player is going to see. This is kind of like when you're watching a behind the scenes of a movie being made. This is the whole world of our game. Only the things displayed through the camera will be displayed to the user. On the scene toolbar here, we do have a lot of different options and drop-downs. We're going to learn these as they come up and when we need them. The one I do want to point out right now, though, is this 2D button. So if I click this, it'll actually change my scene back to 3D. And then if I hit it again, it's going to go back to 2D. So I just want to point out that even though we selected to make a 2D game in our project creation, Unity is always actually running in 3D. Selecting 2D on that template, just set up Unity to by default work as a 2D engine and it'll import project files in a different manner. All of that could be done in a 3D project. And you can actually switch back and forth between 2D and 3D anytime you want using this icon here. Now, the one other item on this menu I just want to show you is this icon here. So if we hover over it, it says toggle visibility of all gizmos in the scene. Now, what a gizmo is, it's all of these icons we see here. They're not anything that a user is going to see when they play the game. It's just there for our reference while we're creating the game and making things a bit easier. So in here, you can see the icons. There's one of a camera here, as well as this one around here. That's showing the border of the camera. There's a little circle in there that's displaying this global light. If we click this icon, it's going to hide all of those gizmos. So sometime while you're working on the game, gizmos are going to get annoying and they can get in the way of what you're working on and you can't see behind them. That's where this icon can be used to disable them. And then you just click it to turn them back on. And if you click the down arrow, you can actually go through and you can select specifically what icons you want to see, and you can change the size of them. You can do a lot of different things here. So this is something that we're going to be using throughout the course. Next one is the game tab. So we just have to click on it here. So it's not set by default. Now what this is actually the output from the camera in our game. So when we run the game, this is actually what the user is going to see. For right now, out of the settings, the only thing we're going to look at here is this drop box here. It says free aspect. So what that means is the output of the camera is going to be a free size. It's going to change depending on the size of the window. So as you can see, it's adjusting here. We don't actually want that. We want to set it to be a specific ratio. We're going to make our game to fit a widescreen aspect ratio, which is 16:9. So if I click on this one here, it's going to come up and we see 16:9 aspect ratio. So I'm going to click that. And now it's always going to stay as 16:9. It will change size, but it'll always be 16:9. And the one thing I want to show you here is this may look a bit different. You may not have these borders. It depends how high of a resolution of a monitor you're using. If you're using 2K or anything higher, you're probably going to see it like mine. And if we select this drop down again, there's this checkbox, low resolution aspect ratios. If we uncheck that, it's going to fill in a lot more of the screen here. So I'm just going to use that one. And then it looks a lot larger here. And as you can see, if I go between different windows here, the mouse changes to two little arrows. If you do that and you click on them, you can click and drag to resize any of these windows. The Unity editor is very customizable, and we're actually going to have a video showing you how you can customize it to exactly what you want and to save those settings. Now, if we look up at the top here, we have a play and pause button. Once we start making a game, this is what's going to actually run our game. And then while it's running, you can pause it. And that's used for a lot of troubleshooting, or if you just want to pause it and go check something else and come back to it. And then we also have this step button where this is actually going to go through one frame of the game at a time every time we click it. Now let's go back to our scene view. And the next window we're going to look at is down here. We have the project window. So this is actually showing the folder structure that I already showed you on your hard drive of where the project is. If we look in here, there's an assets folder. This is the same assets folder that's in that folder on your hard drive. And this is where we put everything into our project. So when we start bringing in files, images, artwork, music, sound files, all of that gets added into the project folder. And then we can clean this up by making our own subfolders and placing things wherever we want them. Now the next window we want to talk about is called the inspector. So I just clicked on empty space, so I don't have anything highlighted right now. And if we look over to the right here, we see a window that says inspector, but there's nothing in it. So this window reacts based on what you have selected in your game. And then it lets us modify that. So if we go back to the hierarchy here, and as I mentioned, this is all the objects in our game. We select the main camera, and now you see all of these different data things populate in here. So now that we have the main camera selected, we can see the inspector. The first thing to point out here is this checkbox. This is where we can enable and disable the object. So if I uncheck this, notice that icon for the camera went away and now it's grayed out in the hierarchy. So that means it's disabled. We didn't delete it, we didn't remove it. It's still there, it's just turned off. So it's not going to do anything at all. Now let's turn that back on. The next field here is the name. So we can just click in here and change the name of the main camera to be anything I want. So I'm just going to leave it as is for right now. And the next thing we have here is a transform. So this is what's called a component. And this is how Unity works. Every game object we put in our game is basically just an empty container. It doesn't actually do or look like anything until we add what's called these components. So in this case, this one's a camera. It has this component on it called camera. And we're going to have separate videos covering cameras and components and all of this. So this will make more sense to you later. I just want this as a quick overview, just so you have a rough idea of what we're doing as we get to that point. So the transform component here, what the transform means is this is the location, position, and rotation of every object in Unity. But just to know, every game object in Unity is going to have one of these, a transform. Every object needs to have a position in the world. Even if there's no icon or no artwork and it's just invisible, it has to exist somewhere inside our game. Okay, and just to demonstrate the components more, if I select the global light, notice now there's no camera component, but there's a light 2D component. So these components are what tells our game what every object does. All right, and one more important window is down here. If we click this little tab called console, now this is a window that just gives us output. It's going to give us any errors that happen in our game, any warnings. As we start to program, we're going to output messages here so we know what's going on in our game. So any information to send back to you from the game is going to show up in here. All right, and the last thing I want to show you here is if we accidentally close or move some of these windows and we don't like everything laid out, we can revert back to this layout anytime we want. So all of these windows are modular. We can customize it however we want. For now, I'm just going to right click on this console one. I'm going to close this tab, so now it's gone. So say if I somehow, I don't even know what I did, I just accidentally removed that one and I can't find it again. And let's do the same with the hierarchy. I'm going to close the hierarchy. So now we're missing a bunch of windows. Anytime if anything like that happens when you're starting out, just go up to the window menu. And then we want to go to layouts and just select default. Now when I select default, it's going to go right back to the default layout. And we're going to create our own layout later, and you can create yours as well. But the default is the one I'm going to try to stick mostly to this layout throughout the course, just because it's a very well structured and balanced layout. But everybody has their own preferences. You're free to make your own as we go through the course. And one other thing to show is on our scene here, I'm going to expand this again. Notice next to the scene, there's this little star right here. This is pretty important. You always want to keep an eye on this. What this star means is changes have been made to your scene or your game that have not been saved yet. It's a really good habit to get in the habit of using shortcuts to save your game all the time so you don't lose anything. If Unity crashes, or what happens a lot of the time is you'll run your game and it's not acting like you think it should, and it's because you didn't save it yet. So we always want to do that. To save, you can go up to the file menu and there's a save button here. But if you look to the right of it, a lot of common things that you use on the menus in Unity have keyboard shortcuts, and they're going to show up right here. So we have one that's Control and S. So if I click save, notice now it's saved and that star is gone. But say if I pick my camera and I just move it a little bit here. Now we have the star back. Instead of going to the menu every time, I can just hit Control S on my keyboard, and that's going to clear up right there. Now our scene is saved again. Pressing Control S like this to save all the time is probably the most used shortcut I use, and I do it all the time to make sure my game's always saved. I highly recommend that as well. Okay, so that's it for the editor basics. That kind of gives you a general rundown of what everything is. And as we start going forward, we're going to dive deeper into them. I'll see you in the next video.